Hello, family. Welcome to Stories with Madezi. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The morning sun poured through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow across the bedroom. Peace stretched lazily, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. 6 months pregnant. She still couldn't believe how quickly time had passed. She felt the faint flutter of movement, a gentle reminder that a tiny life was growing inside her. A soft smile played on her lips. This baby was her miracle, the piece of her and Anthony that would bind them together forever. She turned her head toward her husband, watching his peaceful expression as he slept beside her. He had been everything she had ever prayed for, loving, supportive, and attentive. Every ultrasound, every late-night craving, Anthony had been there, rubbing her feet, whispering promises of a beautiful future. Peace gently traced the outline of his face with her eyes, feeling nothing but love for the man who had made her feel like the luckiest woman in the world. A sudden urge for something sweet made her stomach grumble. Laughing softly, she nudged Anthony awake. "Babe," she murmured, shaking his arm lightly. He groaned, burying his face deeper into the pillow. I want pancakes," she whispered playfully, "with lots of syrup." He peeked one eye open, a lazy grin forming on his lips. "You just had a whole bowl of cereal an hour ago," he teased. Peace pouted, pressing his hand to her belly. "Your child wants pancakes." Anthony chuckled, sitting up and stretching before pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Anything for my queen." As he left the bed to make her breakfast, Peace leaned back against the pillows, basking in the warmth of her seemingly perfect life. If someone had told her years ago that she would be happily married, expecting her first child with a husband who adored her, she wouldn't have believed them. But here she was, living the dream, or so she thought. The air in their home had begun to shift in ways Peace couldn't explain. At first, it was subtle, missed kisses before leaving for work, fewer "I love yous," and distracted responses whenever she spoke. Anthony, who once couldn't go a day without checking in on her, now seemed distant, absorbed in his own world. Peace convinced herself it was just stress. He was, after all, a hard-working man, carrying the weight of providing for their growing family. But as the weeks passed, his absence became more frequent, his excuses more rehearsed. Late nights at the office, urgent business meetings, calls he had to take in another room. The warmth that once filled their home was slowly replaced by an unsettling coldness, one that made Peace's heart tighten with unease. She found herself waiting up for him, staring at the clock, hoping he would come home early just once. But he never did. One evening, as she sat alone at the dinner table, her hands absently rubbing her swollen belly, Anthony finally walked in. It was past midnight. His tie was loosened, his shirt slightly rumpled, something that wouldn't have alarmed her before. But now, everything felt like a sign. "You're late," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Anthony barely looked at her as he set his briefcase down. "I told you I had a meeting," he replied, heading toward the bedroom. Peace followed him, watching as he shrugged off his jacket without sparing her a glance. "You've been having a lot of meetings lately," she said carefully. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What do you want me to say, Peace? Work is demanding." She hesitated, choosing her words. I miss you." For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I'm tired," was all he said before climbing into bed, turning his back to her. And just like that, another piece of their love chipped away. The distance between them grew wider with each passing day, and Peace could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest. Something was wrong. Anthony had become an expert at avoiding her, always too busy, always rushing out the door before she could ask too many questions. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off her now barely touched her at all. Nights in bed were the loneliest. She would lie awake, listening to the sound of his even breathing beside her, wondering why he felt like a stranger. When she tried to reach for him, his body tensed, and he would mutter something about being tired before rolling away. The rejection stung in ways she couldn't describe. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about connection, closeness, the love they once shared. And yet, Anthony seemed completely unaffected by the growing chasm between them. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Peace came across a shirt of Anthony's that smelled different. Not like his usual cologne, but something floral, something foreign. Her stomach twisted as she held the fabric to her nose, the unfamiliar scent flooding her senses. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself she was being paranoid, but doubt had already planted its seed. Later that night, as Anthony sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, Peace hesitated before asking, "Anthony, is there something you're not telling me?" His fingers froze for a split second before he looked up. "What do you mean?" She bit her lip. "You've been distant. You barely talk to me. It feels like you're slipping away." He sighed, setting his phone down. "Peace, you're overthinking. You're pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. Just relax, okay?" The dismissal cut deeper than she expected. Her heart screamed that something was wrong, but Anthony had already decided that her concerns weren't worth listening to. The late-night phone calls were what finally shattered her illusions. Peace had always trusted Anthony, had never once felt the need to question his loyalty. But now, doubt followed her everywhere. It started with whispers behind closed doors, conversations that ended the moment she entered the room. Then came the excuses. "It's just work. You wouldn't understand. It's nothing important." But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a storm brewing in the distance, ready to consume everything in its path. One night, she woke up to the faint sound of his voice from the living room. She tiptoed down the hallway, her heart pounding. "I miss you too," Anthony said softly, his tone laced with something intimate. Peace's breath caught. The warmth drained from her body, replaced by an icy chill. She pressed her back against the wall, struggling to breathe. He was talking to someone else. Not a work colleague, not a friend, a woman. The realization made her stomach churn. When he finally hung up, she forced herself to step into the room, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. "Who were you talking to?" Anthony's head snapped up, his expression momentarily startled before he masked it with indifference. "No one important," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. Peace folded her arms. "Then why did you say you missed them?" A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Peace, I don't have the energy for this." She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay strong. "I need you to be honest with me." His jaw tightened. "You need to stop making problems where there aren't any." And with that, he brushed past her, leaving her standing in the darkness, wondering when their love had become a lie. The ache in Peace's heart had become unbearable. She wanted to be wrong, desperately so, but the signs were undeniable. Anthony was slipping away, and no matter how hard she tried to grasp onto the remnants of their love, it was like trying to hold water in her hands. She spent her days replaying every interaction in her head, searching for clues, for something to prove that her mind was just playing tricks on her. But the late nights, the lies, the way he barely met her eyes anymore, it all painted a truth she wasn't ready to face. The man who once held her with so much devotion now treated her like a burden. And worst of all, he didn't even notice the pain he was causing. One afternoon, as she sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television, her phone vibrated with an incoming call. It was Benita, her best friend, the one person she could confide in. "Peace, you don't sound like yourself." Benita's voice was filled with concern. "What's wrong?" Peace hesitated, swallowing the lump in her throat. I think Anthony is cheating on me." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then Benita sighed. "I had a feeling something was off. He's changed, hasn't he?" Peace closed her eyes, letting a tear slip down her cheek. "He's not the same man I married. He barely looks at me, Benita. And last night, I heard him on the phone with someone, a woman." Benita's voice hardened. "Then don't ignore it. You deserve the truth, Peace. If your gut is telling you something is wrong, trust it." Determined to put her doubts to rest, Peace decided she needed proof. She wasn't the kind of woman to jump to conclusions, but she also couldn't sit back and allow herself to be blind to the truth. So, when Anthony left the house one Saturday morning, muttering something about an urgent business meeting, she followed him. It wasn't something she ever imagined herself doing, trailing her own husband like a stranger, but her heart wouldn't rest until she knew. As she drove a safe distance behind his car, her hands trembled against the steering wheel. She prayed she would be wrong. She prayed that she would find him exactly where he said he would be. But when he pulled up in front of an upscale restaurant, her breath caught in her throat. From her spot in the parking lot, she watched as a woman stepped out of another car and walked toward Anthony. Her stomach twisted painfully. She was young, stunning, with long flowing hair and an effortless elegance that made Peace suddenly aware of the weight she had gained during pregnancy. Catherine. The name floated into her mind like a dagger piercing her chest. She didn't need introductions. She knew instinctively. This was the woman Anthony had been hiding. Her hands clenched into fists as she watched them laugh together, as Anthony leaned in just a little too close, as his hand brushed against Catherine's lower back. It was intimate, familiar. It was the kind of touch he had once reserved only for her. Peace drove home in a daze, her mind spiraling with emotions so intense she felt physically ill. Betrayal, pain, rage, it was all consuming. But beneath the storm of her emotions, a quiet, cold determination settled in her bones. If Anthony had truly replaced her, if he had been living a double life while she carried his child, then she needed more than just the sight of them together. She needed evidence. That night, as Anthony slept beside her, peaceful, unbothered, she reached for his phone with trembling hands. He had never been secretive before, but now she noticed the way he kept it close, the way he always angled the screen away from her. Her heart pounded as she entered his passcode, a combination she had memorized long ago. The messages she found shattered what was left of her hope. Flirty texts, hotel reservations, expensive gifts. They had been together for months. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred as she read his words to Catherine, words that once belonged to her. I miss you. I can't wait to see you. You're everything to me. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around her. Carefully, she took screenshots, forwarding them to her own phone. If Anthony thought she would sit back and let this happen, he was sorely mistaken. The man she had loved, the father of her child, had shattered their family. And now, she was done being the fool. The weight of betrayal sat like a stone in Peace's chest, crushing her with every breath she took. The texts, the gifts, the hotel reservations, they were undeniable proof that Anthony had given his heart to another woman. She had spent years believing in the strength of their love, had built a home with him, carried his child, only to realize that she had been living in a lie. That night, as she stared at his sleeping form, she felt a simmering rage beneath her heartbreak. How dare he sleep so peacefully while she lay awake, drowning in the agony of his betrayal? He had stolen her peace, her happiness, and worst of all, her trust. And for what? A fleeting thrill with a woman who had no respect for another woman's home. The more she thought about it, the more her fury built, until she could no longer contain it. She sat up abruptly, flipping on the bedside lamp. "Wake up, Anthony," she said, her voice eerily calm. He groaned, turning over. "What is it, Peace?" "Get up," she snapped, grabbing his phone and tossing it onto his chest. "Explain these." He blinked in confusion before picking up the device. The moment realization dawned on him, his expression darkened. "What the hell, Peace? You went through my phone." "Don't you dare turn this on me," she shouted, her voice shaking. "You lied to me. You made me feel crazy, made me doubt myself while you were running around with her." Anthony swung his legs over the bed, rubbing his face in frustration. "Lower your voice," he muttered. "The neighbors. To hell with the neighbors," she cut him off. "I want the truth. How long have you been seeing Catherine? How long have you been making a fool out of me?" Silence. He wouldn't even look at her, and that was all the answer she needed. Tears burned behind Peace's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not break in front of him. Anthony finally sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Peace, you're pregnant. You're emotional. Maybe you're blowing this out of proportion." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Blowing this out of proportion," she repeated. "I found hotel bookings, expensive gifts, text messages where you tell another woman that she's everything to you. And you want me to believe I'm being emotional?" He clenched his jaw, his body tense. Things haven't been the same between us, Peace, he muttered. Ever since you got pregnant, it's been all about the baby. We don't talk, we don't. So, you punished me by finding another woman, she interrupted, her voice filled with disbelief. Instead of talking to me? Instead of fixing our marriage? Anthony stood up, pacing the room. I don't expect you to understand, he muttered. No, you don't expect me to fight back, she corrected, her voice dangerously low. You thought I'd be the quiet, devoted wife who'd turn a blind eye while you humiliated me. His eyes met hers then, filled with something that looked like guilt. But it was too late for that. I want you out of this house, she whispered, her voice barely holding back the tears. Now, he scoffed. And go where? To her, she spat. That's where you want to be, right? So go. But don't come back. His expression hardened, and for a brief moment it looked like he might fight her on it. But instead, he grabbed his car keys and left without another word. And just like that, the home they had built together crumbled into nothing. The following days were a blur of pain and exhaustion. Peace moved through them like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. The man she loved had chosen another, had walked away without even trying to fix what they had. And yet, she still foolishly hoped he would come back, that he would wake up and realize what he had done. But reality hit her harder than she could have imagined. It happened on a day when she needed him most. She had been feeling sharp pains in her stomach all morning, a deep discomfort that sent fear racing through her veins. Worried for her baby, she rushed to the hospital, clutching her belly as she made her way through the emergency room doors. The nurses quickly admitted her, running tests, assuring her they would monitor everything closely. All she wanted was Anthony. Even after everything, he was still the father of her child, still the man she had built a life with. So, with trembling hands, she called him. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Desperation clawed at her, and she was about to try a third time when a familiar voice reached her ears. Anthony, you're too much. A woman's laughter rang out. Peace's blood turned to ice. Slowly, she turned her head toward the waiting area. And there he was, sitting beside Catherine, laughing, holding her hand, caring for her the way he should have been caring for his wife. The air was sucked from her lungs, her vision blurring with shock. She had come to the hospital, terrified for their baby, while he was here, comforting his mistress. Her hands trembled as she placed them protectively over her belly. Every ounce of pain she had felt over the past few weeks, every doubt, every sleepless night, it all came crashing down at once. Peace stood frozen in place, her breath caught somewhere between a sob and a scream. Her worst nightmare had materialized right before her eyes. Anthony sat in the hospital waiting area, his body angled toward Catherine, concern written all over his face. His hand, the same hand that had once held hers in moments of love and devotion, now rested protectively on another woman's knee. Catherine, glowing with satisfaction, whispered something to him, and he chuckled, as if his pregnant wife wasn't barely 10 feet away, fighting for breath. The sheer audacity of the scene shattered something deep within Peace. How had she ever believed that this man, this liar, had been her forever? Her knees felt weak, and for a moment she feared she would collapse right there in the hospital hallway. But just as a wave of dizziness washed over her, a nurse gently touched her shoulder, pulling her back into reality. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the nurse asked, concern etched across her face. Peace swallowed the lump in her throat, her lips trembling as she forced herself to speak. "That man over there," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "He's my husband." The nurse's eyes widened in shock, glancing at Anthony before returning her gaze to Peace. "Do you want me to?" "No," Peace cut her off, lifting her chin despite the agony slicing through her. "I will handle this." Gathering what little strength she had left, she stepped forward, each step like walking on shards of glass. The air in the waiting room grew heavier as she neared them, the world narrowing down to just the three of them. When she stopped in front of them, Anthony's laughter died in his throat. His face drained of color as he stared at her, caught. Catherine, on the other hand, simply leaned back in her chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips, completely unbothered. "Peace?" Anthony finally spoke, his voice filled with the kind of dread that came from being confronted with undeniable truth. Peace's fingers curled into fists, her nails biting into her palms as she fought the urge to slap the smug expression off Catherine's face. The pain in her chest burned like a wildfire, but it was the humiliation that seared the deepest. Anthony, the man who had once sworn to cherish and protect her, had abandoned her for this? A woman who looked at her with nothing but amusement, as if she were the outsider in her own marriage. "Tell me, Anthony," Peace began, her voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside her. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting toward Catherine before settling back on Peace. "It's not what it looks like," he muttered weakly. Peace let out a bitter laugh. "Not what it looks like," she repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. "You left me alone in our home, ignored my calls, and now I find you here, holding her hand, while I, your wife, carrying your child, am in a hospital bed, and you dare say it's not what it looks like." Anthony sighed, running a hand over his face, but he still didn't apologize. He didn't even look guilty, just annoyed that he had been caught. Catherine, however, was fully enjoying the moment. "Well, you have to understand," she drawled, her voice laced with condescension. "Anthony has responsibilities. He can't be everywhere at once, can he?" Peace's head snapped toward her, rage bubbling to the surface. "And who the hell are you to speak for my husband?" she snapped. "Oh, wait, he's not my husband anymore, is he? He's yours now. You've made that very clear." Catherine simply shrugged, crossing her legs. "It was bound to happen, sweetheart. You couldn't keep him interested forever. That was the final straw." Without thinking, Peace grabbed the nearest glass of water from a side table and threw it directly into Catherine's smug face. Gasps echoed around the waiting room, but Peace didn't care. She turned on her heel, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I'll see you in court, Anthony, and trust me, when I'm done with you, you'll regret the day you ever looked at this woman." Peace walked out of the hospital without looking back, though every step felt like dragging chains of betrayal behind her. Her hands trembled as she fumbled to open her car door, her vision blurred by unshed tears. The reality of what had just happened settled over her like a crushing weight. Anthony had chosen Catherine. He had chosen another woman over the family they had built, over the child she was carrying. He had humiliated her in the most unforgivable way, and now she had no choice but to walk away. But walking away wasn't as easy as she had thought. As much as she hated him in that moment, the idea of divorcing him, of tearing apart the home she had once dreamed of, broke her in ways she wasn't prepared for. How was she supposed to let go of the man she had given everything to? How was she supposed to accept that the love they once shared was gone? That evening, Benita found Peace curled up on her couch, staring blankly at the wall. "Peace," Benita whispered gently, sitting beside her. "What are you going to do?" Peace exhaled shakily, her voice hollow. "I'm going to file for divorce." Saying it out loud felt like ripping open a fresh wound, but what other choice did she have? Anthony had betrayed her in ways she could never forgive. He had looked her in the eyes and still chosen Catherine, and if he could do that while she was carrying his child, he would do it again. "You're making the right decision," Benita assured her, squeezing her hand. "You deserve better." Peace let out a small, broken laugh. "I don't know if I'll ever believe that," she admitted. "But I know I can't live like this. I refuse to." And in that moment, she made a promise to herself to never let a man reduce her to nothing ever again. The emptiness of the house was deafening. Every room echoed with memories of a life Peace had spent years building, a life that had crumbled in an instant. The kitchen still smelled of the meals she used to cook for Anthony. The bedroom still carried the faint scent of his cologne, and the closet was still half full with his clothes, as if he would walk back in at any moment. But he wouldn't. He had made his choice, and so had she. As painful as it was, Peace knew there was no turning back now. The woman who had once clung to love with blind hope was gone. In her place was someone hardened by betrayal, a mother who had no room for illusions. The reality of single motherhood loomed before her like an uphill battle, but if there was one thing she was sure of, it was that her child would never grow up in a home where love was one-sided. Benita helped her pack her things, offering words of encouragement between each box they filled. "You're doing the right thing, Peace," she assured her, handing her a framed wedding photo. Peace stared at the picture for a long moment before tossing it into a garbage bag. "The right thing doesn't always feel good," she muttered, blinking back tears. Benita placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe not now, but one day you'll look back and realize this was the best decision you ever made." Peace inhaled deeply, willing herself to believe it. That night, as she lay in a new bed in Benita's apartment, she placed her hands on her growing belly, whispering, "It's just you and me now, baby, and I promise I will never let anyone make us feel unworthy again." Anthony sat in his office, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of him. The numbers weren't adding up. Profits were declining, clients were pulling out, and for the first time in years, his business was showing cracks. He ran a frustrated hand through his hair, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the feeling that this wasn't just an unfortunate coincidence. Everything had started going wrong after Peace left. She had been his anchor, his stability, even when he had taken her for granted. And now, without her, his world felt off balance. He had thought that being with Catherine would be exciting, that it would bring him the happiness he had convinced himself was missing in his marriage. But instead of fulfillment, all he felt was emptiness. Catherine had started to show her true colors too. She was no longer the doting, affectionate woman she had pretended to be in the beginning. Instead, she was demanding, impatient, and unapologetically materialistic. She didn't care about his bad day at work or the stress he was under. She only cared about what he could buy her. "Anthony, we need to talk," she said one evening, crossing her arms. "You promised me a new car, but now you're saying we need to watch our expenses. What happened to all that money you used to have?" He clenched his jaw. "I'm handling it, Catherine," she scoffed. "Handling it sounds to me like you're losing control." The words stung more than they should have. Anthony had once been the man who had it all, a thriving business, a devoted wife, a child on the way, and now he was barely holding on to any of it. It didn't take long for Catherine to grow restless. She had tolerated Anthony's mood swings and financial stress for weeks. But Catherine was not the kind of woman to stick around for a sinking ship. She had seen the warning signs, the long nights he spent staring at his laptop in frustration, the credit cards he now hesitated to hand over, the way his patience was wearing thin. He was no longer the powerful, successful man she had pursued. He was just a man falling apart. And if there was one thing Catherine refused to do, it was settle. She had never intended to be the wife who struggled alongside her husband. She had set her sights on luxury, on a life of ease, and Anthony had been her ticket to that. But now, he was just another mistake. One evening, she came home late, her makeup flawless, her perfume strong, and her phone filled with unread messages from Anthony. He was waiting in the living room, his arms crossed. "Where have you been?" he asked sharply. She rolled her eyes, dropping her designer bag onto the couch. "Out." "Out where, Catherine?" His voice was low, dangerous. She smirked. "You don't get to ask me that." His fists clenched. "I'm still your man." Catherine let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, are you? Because the way I see it, you're not the man I signed up for. You're broke, you're miserable, and honestly, you're just not that interesting anymore." Anthony felt the ground shift beneath him. "You used me," he said quietly, realization sinking in. She tilted her head, not bothering to deny it. "I used you the way you used Peace," she said simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better things to do." And with that, she walked out, leaving him alone with nothing but the mess he had made of his life. The first few weeks after moving in with Benita were the hardest. The weight of betrayal still clung to Peace like a second skin, suffocating her with every breath. Nights were the worst, when silence filled the room, and the memories she had tried so hard to suppress came rushing back. She would wake up drenched in sweat, reaching for Anthony out of habit, only to be met with the cruel reminder that she was alone. But as painful as it was, she refused to be broken. Each morning, she forced herself to get out of bed, to eat for the sake of her child, to remind herself that she was still standing. Benita became her rock, refusing to let her wallow in self-pity. "You are not just a woman who was cheated on, Peace," she told her one evening. You are a mother, a fighter, and you are going to build something for yourself that no man can ever take away again. And for the first time in a long time, Peace believed her. Determined to take back control of her life, she began looking for a job. She had once been so wrapped up in her marriage that she had neglected her own ambitions, but now she was ready to reclaim her independence. One afternoon, Benita introduced her to an old acquaintance, Clifford, a successful businessman who owned a real estate firm. He had heard about Peace's situation and was willing to give her an opportunity to work in his company's administrative department. "I'm not offering you this out of pity," he told her firmly. "I see potential in you, Peace. You need a fresh start, and I think you'll thrive here." Peace hesitated, the weight of doubt creeping in. "I haven't worked in years, Clifford. I don't know if I'll be any good." He smiled warmly. "You'll never know unless you try." And with that, Peace took the first step toward rebuilding her life. Anthony hadn't seen Peace in months, but the moment he laid eyes on her again, he barely recognized the woman standing before him. She had always been beautiful, but now she was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with him. Her skin glowed with confidence, her posture was straighter, her smile, though faint, held something new, self-assurance. He had convinced himself that she would crumble without him, that she would come running back once the weight of single motherhood became too much to bear. But here she was, standing in a high-end cafe, dressed in a sleek, professional outfit, completely indifferent to his presence. He watched as she spoke with a group of business associates, her tone clear and commanding. It hit him like a punch to the gut. She didn't need him anymore. As if sensing his gaze, she turned, and their eyes met. For a brief second, something flickered in her expression, recognition, maybe even surprise. But then, just as quickly, her face hardened. She gave him the briefest of nods before turning away, continuing her conversation as if he were just another stranger. It was the first time in his life that Anthony felt truly invisible. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as jealousy burned in his chest. She had moved on, and that realization was more unbearable than anything he had ever faced. He wanted to approach her, to say something, anything, but what could he possibly say? That he missed her? That he regretted everything? That he had been wrong? No, it was too late for that. She was no longer his. The loss of Peace settled over Anthony like a suffocating blanket, choking him with regret. He had been a fool. He had thought he was upgrading when he left her, chasing after passion and excitement. But what had it gotten him? Loneliness, failure, and an empty bed. Catherine had left. His finances were dwindling, and now even the one woman who had ever truly loved him had moved on. He found himself reaching for his phone more times than he could count, his thumb hovering over Peace's number. But every time he stopped himself. What would he even say? Sorry. It wasn't enough. He had broken her in ways that couldn't be undone. But he couldn't live like this. He needed to see her, to hear her voice, to feel something other than this crushing emptiness. So, against his better judgment, he drove to her new apartment. He stood outside, heart pounding, staring at the door that separated him from the woman he had once called his wife. He knocked, bracing himself for whatever came next. When the door opened, his breath caught. Peace stood there, her belly round her face calm, her eyes unreadable. "Anthony," she said, her tone neutral. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I needed to see you." She exhaled, crossing her arms. "Why?" He struggled for words, his carefully crafted confidence crumbling. "Because I made a mistake, Peace. I know that now." Silence stretched between them before she spoke again, her voice cold and final. "You did," she agreed, "but that's not my problem anymore." And with that, she shut the door in his face. Anthony stood frozen outside Peace's door, his hands still clenched into fists at his sides. She had shut him out, literally and figuratively. He had come expecting anger, maybe even a slap or a few well-earned insults, but not this. Not indifference. The woman who once cried over him, who had once begged him to love her the way he used to, now saw him as nothing more than a mistake she had outgrown. And that realization tore through him like a slow, agonizing burn. As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The name on the screen made his stomach twist. Catherine. His lips curled into a bitter smile. Funny how peace had shut the door in his face, but the woman he had thrown it all away for was still trying to claw her way back in. Against his better judgment, he answered, "Anthony, where are you?" Catherine's voice was thick with irritation. "I've been calling all night." He let out a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel as he spoke. "I don't owe you an explanation, Catherine." There was a pause before she scoffed. "Excuse me." "You don't owe me, Anthony. Don't forget that I'm carrying your child." His grip on the wheel tightened. Her child. He had once believed that meant something, that it was worth sacrificing everything for. But now, he wasn't even sure if she had ever truly cared about him, or if he had just been another stepping stone in her climb to a life of luxury. "I need money," she continued, her voice losing its sweetness. "The rent is due, and my car needs maintenance." Anthony exhaled sharply. "Catherine, I told you I'm handling things." "You keep saying that, but your handling doesn't seem to be working," she shot back. "Are you even still working? Because from where I'm standing, you're just a broke, pathetic excuse of a man who let go of a good wife for a fantasy." The words were a slap to the face. Catherine had never loved him. And the worst part? He had given up everything for her. The universe had a way of making people answer for their sins, and Anthony was beginning to realize that his punishment was long overdue. His company was crumbling beneath him, investors were pulling out, and the once loyal employees who had admired him now looked at him with pity. He had built his career on confidence, on being a man others wanted to follow, but now he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. The whispers in the office were no longer subtle. Everyone knew he had lost peace, knew about the scandal with Catherine, and now they were watching as his world burned. The final blow came when his accountant walked into his office with a grim expression. "Anthony, we need to talk," the older man said, placing a file on the desk. "If you don't act fast, you're going to lose everything." Anthony didn't need to open the folder to know what was inside. He could feel it in his bones, the weight of his choices finally collapsing in on him. "What are my options?" he asked, his voice hollow. The accountant sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sell your assets, cut your losses, and pray that it's enough to keep you afloat." Anthony let out a humorless chuckle. "That bad, huh?" The man gave him a pitying look. "You should have never let go of your wife, Anthony. She was the only stability you had." The words sent a fresh wave of bitterness through him. He had lost everything that mattered, his wife, his child, his business. And for what? A woman who had used him, a fantasy that had turned into a nightmare? His downfall had been slow and excruciating, and there was no one to blame but himself. Peace sat in the courtroom, her hands resting protectively over her belly as she listened to the lawyers argue back and forth. This was it, the final battle. Anthony had made it clear that he wouldn't let her go without a fight, and despite everything he had done, he had the audacity to demand joint custody. She had expected him to fight dirty, to paint her as an emotional, unstable woman who was making irrational decisions out of spite. But what he didn't anticipate was that she had come prepared. Her lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Linda, stood with unwavering confidence. "Your Honor, we have gathered evidence that Mr. Anthony not only abandoned my client during her pregnancy, but was actively involved in an extramarital affair while she was carrying his child." Anthony's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, knowing that there was no real defense against the truth. Linda continued, flipping through a stack of papers. "Furthermore, we have proof that Mr. Anthony has been experiencing financial instability, which would make it difficult for him to provide a stable environment for the child." She turned to the judge, her voice steady. "My client is more than capable of raising her child independently. She has secured employment, a safe living space, and most importantly, she has demonstrated unwavering dedication to the well-being of her unborn child." Anthony clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists beneath the table. He was losing, and he knew it. But what cut deeper than the legal battle was the way Peace refused to look at him, as if he were already a distant memory, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. The gavel struck against the judge's bench, the sound echoing through the quiet courtroom. This was the moment Peace had been waiting for, the moment she reclaimed her life from the man who had broken her. The judge's voice was steady as he delivered the verdict, his words sealing Anthony's fate. After reviewing the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Anthony failed in his duties as a husband and soon-to-be father. The court finds it in the best interest of the child that full custody be awarded to the mother, with no visitation rights granted to the father at this time. A wave of relief crashed over Peace. She had fought for this, not out of spite, but because she refused to allow her child to be caught in the web of Anthony's selfishness. She had spent months preparing for this battle, gathering undeniable proof of his neglect, his infidelity, his recklessness. And now she had won. Anthony sat motionless, his face unreadable. But Peace saw the truth in the way his fingers tightened against the table, the way his shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of his actions had finally settled upon him. He had walked into this courtroom thinking he could still win, thinking that his presence alone would be enough to sway the judgment in his favor. But he had underestimated her. He had thought she would be weak, that she would crumble the way she used to when he dismissed her concerns. But she had grown. And now, as she rose from her seat, standing tall and unshaken, she looked at Anthony for the first time in months. "This is what you chose," she said softly, no hatred in her voice, only finality. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to respond, but nothing came out, because there was nothing left to say. She was done. The air outside the courtroom felt different, lighter, freer. Peace closed her eyes for a moment, letting the reality of it all sink in. She was no longer Anthony's wife. She was no longer bound to his betrayal, to his lies, to the pain he had inflicted upon her. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. Benita was waiting for her outside, a wide grin on her face. "I knew you'd win," she said, pulling Peace into a tight hug. "I never doubted you for a second." Peace let out a breathy laugh, something that felt foreign after so many months of sorrow. "It's over," she whispered. "I can finally move on." Benita linked their arms together, leading her toward the car. "And that's exactly what we're going to do." No more tears over that man, no more looking back. That night, as she sat in her new apartment, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had done it. She had survived the worst heartbreak of her life, and now she was carving out a future that belonged to her and her child alone. The nursery was nearly finished, the soft pastel colors a stark contrast to the darkness she had endured. She ran her hands over her belly, whispering softly, "We're safe now, baby. We have everything we need." And for the first time, she truly believed it. She didn't need Anthony. She never had. He had simply been a chapter in her life, a painful one, yes, but one that had led her to this very moment. And now she was free to write the rest of her story on her own terms. Anthony sat in the dimly lit bar, the drink in his hand, long forgotten. He had lost everything. His business had crumbled, his bank accounts were bleeding dry, and now the only thing that had ever truly mattered was gone. He had convinced himself that Peace would always be there, that no matter what he did, she would always forgive him, always fight for him. But she hadn't. She had fought against him, and she had won. He had spent so much time chasing after fleeting pleasure, after a fantasy that had turned to dust, that he had never realized what he had until it was too late. His fingers tightened around the glass, his mind replaying the image of her walking out of the courtroom, victorious, without even looking back at him. In a moment of desperation, he reached for his phone, his heart pounding as he scrolled through his contacts until he found her name. His thumb hovered over the call button, uncertainty gnawing at him. What would he even say? That he was sorry, that he regretted everything, that he wanted another chance? Finally, he hit dial, pressing the phone to his ear. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. He exhaled shakily, then tried again. Nothing. His throat tightened as he typed out a message. "Peace, please. Just talk to me. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve it, but please. I just need to see you." He hit send, his chest aching with something he had never truly felt before, loss. The days passed with a newfound sense of clarity, and Peace found herself embracing the life she had rebuilt. She was no longer the woman waiting for love to save her. Instead, she had become the kind of woman who saved herself. Her job at Clifford's real estate firm gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years, and each day brought a little more confidence, a little more assurance that she was exactly where she needed to be. She spent her evenings preparing for the arrival of her baby, decorating the nursery with soft blues and yellows, filling the shelves with books she would one day read to her child. Her future was hers alone, and for the first time she didn't fear it. But just when she thought her heart had settled into its new rhythm, Clifford entered her life in a way she hadn't expected. One afternoon, as they worked late at the office, Clifford leaned against her desk, watching her intently. "You're different now," he mused, a small smile tugging at his lips. Peace arched a brow. "Different how?" He exhaled, as if searching for the right words. "You carry yourself like someone who knows her worth." His words sent a strange warmth through her chest, something foreign yet familiar. She had spent so long believing she was only as valuable as the love she received from a man, but now, standing in front of Clifford, she realized she was valuable simply because she was herself. "I think I'm just finally seeing myself clearly," she admitted. Clifford nodded. "And do you see how incredible you are?" The sincerity in his voice made her heart stutter. It had been so long since someone had looked at her without pity, without expectations. Maybe, just maybe, her heart had room for something new. Anthony sat in his nearly empty apartment, his fingers tightening around the phone as he stared at the last message he had sent to Peace. No response. It had been days, and still she hadn't answered him. The realization stung more than he cared to admit. He was no longer a priority in her life. He had spent so much time believing she would always be there, that he had never truly considered what it would feel like if she wasn't. But now it was clear she had moved on, and he was nothing more than a shadow of her past. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through his contacts, pausing when he saw Benita's name. Desperation clawed at his throat as he hit dial. She answered on the third ring, her tone immediately cold. "What do you want, Anthony?" "I need to talk to Peace," he said, his voice hoarse. Benita scoffed. "Are you serious? After everything, you think you can just call and ask for her?" He exhaled sharply. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from her, but I need to see her." There was a beat of silence before Benita spoke again, her voice laced with something close to pity. "Anthony, she's not yours anymore. And honestly, she never really was. You just didn't realize it until now." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent years believing that Peace belonged to him, that no matter what, she would always find her way back. But now, she had found her way forward without him. Peace stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by laughter and warmth as her friends gathered to celebrate the upcoming arrival of her baby. This was the life she had fought for, the life she had earned. As she opened gifts and listened to Benita's playful teasing, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about the past. She wasn't mourning the life she had lost. She was celebrating the life she was about to create. Clifford stood near the window, watching her with quiet admiration, and when their eyes met, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. As the night came to an end, Clifford walked her to the door, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. "You're glowing," he said softly. Peace chuckled. "That's just the pregnancy." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that. You're happy, Peace, and you deserve to be." She exhaled, letting his words sink in. She was happy, not because of a man, not because of love, but because she had finally learned to love herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Peace felt something stir in her heart, something new, something worth exploring. Anthony hadn't seen Peace in weeks, but when he finally did, he barely recognized the woman standing before him. She carried herself with an ease that made his chest tighten, a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up without him. He had convinced himself that if he just saw her one last time, if he just got the chance to explain, maybe he could fix what had been broken. But standing in front of her now, he knew the truth. There was nothing left to fix. Peace wasn't looking at him with hatred or anger. No, what shattered him the most was that she was looking at him like he was a stranger, as if he was nothing more than a blurry memory from a past she no longer cared about. His voice wavered as he finally spoke. "Peace, can we talk?" She exhaled, crossing her arms over her chest. "What is there to talk about, Anthony?" Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was detached, indifferent, final. He swallowed hard, fighting against the desperation clawing at his throat. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just needed to see you. Peace tilted her head slightly, studying him, and then she let out a small breath. You needed to see me, or you needed to feel better about yourself? He flinched at her words, knowing she was right. He had spent so long trying to justify his actions, trying to convince himself that he had simply made a mistake. But a mistake was forgetting a birthday, missing an important event. What he had done was a choice, and choices had consequences. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Peace gave a slow nod, her eyes holding nothing but understanding, not love. And I hope you learn from it, she said softly. But Anthony, this is goodbye. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, with nothing but regret. Peace sat in her nursery that evening, the soft hum of music playing in the background as she rocked in the chair, hands resting over the life she was about to bring into the world. The past year had been the hardest of her life, but it had also been the most transformative. She had lost, she had broken, but she had rebuilt. She had found her strength in places she never thought to look, in herself. There was a time when she had believed that love had to come from someone else to be real. But now she knew better. Love had to start with her. She glanced up when she heard a knock at the door. Clifford stood there, a hesitant smile on his face. I know it's late, but I wanted to check on you. She gestured for him to sit, and as he did, their eyes met in a way that spoke of something unspoken, something blooming. Clifford, she said softly, why do you keep showing up? He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Because you're worth showing up for. Her heart clenched at the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't an attempt to sweep her off her feet. It was steady. It was real. It was everything she had never had before. She smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in what felt like forever. Then I guess you can stay. And just like that, Peace took her first step into a new beginning, one where she was whole, loved, and finally free. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.